Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bear Academy and Bear Talk, a podcast about technology, design, and productivity. For today, I have a guest that I'm quite familiar with because I worked with him. The guest today, Armando Torrealba, is the experienced design manager at Atlassian, an Australian software company. And he was my ex-manager at a New Zealand software company that I'm still working at. And he also worked at other companies as senior designer and design leader in New Zealand. And he's not born and grow up in New Zealand, same as me. He came from, I'm not came from Chile, but he and I both came from a different country. And now he thrives in New Zealand and Australia as a designer. So that's one of the reasons I invited Armando to join my podcast. But also, as while worked with Armando earlier at Xero, I noticed that he's really mindful at design, and also his ways of communication and even the process for doing design is quite interesting to learn. So especially for my personally, I've learned a lot. So would like to have this conversation on my podcast so that it can help other people as well. So yeah, and that we have today's guest, Armando. And yeah, Armando, how are you? How are you today?
I'm really good, man. Thank you for all the nice words. Yeah, I was blushing a little. But yeah, I'm really good, man. Super happy to talk to you on this morning.
Cool. Am I missed anything on introduction of who you are?
No, you got it all right. Yeah, I'm from Chile. I moved here in 2015. But yeah, I've been around. I started seeing the world and living in different countries quite early in my life, and it's something that I think really shaped my personality and who I am. But other than that, yeah, you were pretty spot on on my bio. So thank you for that, man. Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, always happy to do that. And I noticed one thing, because normally, like for every podcast, sometimes I just check guests' website or LinkedIn profile or other places for a little bit about who they are. And I did the same on your website as well. Notice one thing quite interesting. So unlike other professionals on LinkedIn, for their profile description, they wrote a lot about who they are and what they want to do, things like that. But I noticed on your profile page, there's only a quote, like if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings, from Tom and David Kelly. Really interesting about that. So could you tell a little bit more about like why you're doing that, different from other people, about who you are, but just with a quote?
Wow, that's such a big question to start with. But yeah, I think the reason why I didn't decide to write a description about me is mostly because I believe in experience and connection between people. So I don't see much value of trying to create an image of myself for people who don't know me. So I think what's really important for me is to connect and to learn with people and work together in an experiential way. And I'm not really worried about the image I'm building for people who don't know me. And also, I think my curriculum it speaks for itself. So that's basically what I have done. And apart from that, I don't I don't feel I need to build another image of myself. And I decided to choose that quote because for me, that's a really good summary of how I see myself as a designer. I like I like using this superpower that I think designers have to actually show the future to other stakeholders and colleagues or people you're working with. So for me, instead of trying to build an image that may not be true for people that don't know me, I decided to share a quote that I feel identified with from a professional point of view. And also, I really like quotes and I really like IDEO. So I think it was a kind of like quirky, but also real way of introducing myself.
Yeah, that's I think it's really a unique way. So differentiate who you are from another perspective. Because the reason I'm asking this question is like now almost everyone is starting building their self-image because of social media and other things. So it's more like we want to show who we are as a better person than who we actually are on social media. Many people will do that, but from what I see is that you're trying to find the value people can get from you, or like the value you can provide, or like some of the value you believe or the principles that you believe
Mm,
from different quotes. So that's a really good one. So yeah, probably a big question for start of today's conversation, but I think it's really interesting to find that, because people might start have something interesting about you, but when they start to look at your profile, they find, oh, that's quite different, but that's
yeah,
the impression. And
yeah.
yeah, I think
Then,
it's work.
yeah, also there is another side to that, and that's something that I learned through yoga, not the physical yoga, but the more spiritual yoga. They usually talk about deflecting the praise you get in order not to get too attached with your ego, so you keep growing. So for me, this um, decision of not building my personal brand or my personal image, it's more about not trying to get too hooked up with who I think I am, so I can keep improving, you know? So that's
Mm.
why I don't like to talk about me as, I don't know, experienced or leader, because I know those are things I'm doing at work, but I don't want to get too attached to who I think I am, because I feel I may um, give up on learning
Yep.
or growing. Yeah. So yeah, that's why I don't try to identify myself with something, because I think that same thing can constrain me a little in my growth.
Wow, that's a really good perspective. Awesome. How did it all start? Like, because now we jump directly to some of the values that you're trying to do while work. But how does your design journey start from Chile? Could you like walk us through like your journey on a high level?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I think the main reason why I became a designer, it's because I always really enjoy building things, and maybe it's something that happens to a lot of designers or engineers. But my father was an engineer, and he had this massive workshop at home, because he was mostly working half at home and half at the factory he used to work for. I mean,
Yeah.
he had a strange work setting, because he was like a engineering freelancer. So he was actually fixing machines, like all sort of like big machines, like factory line machines. So at home, he had this big workshop with big machines, and I was always around, like listening to music, playing with things. And as soon as I understood how the tools worked, and I was like maybe 7, 8, I started to put things together in order to build useful stuff. So I will grab like remainings of metal and wood and plastic and try to make something new, Most of the time they were like really useless objects, but I was trying to give them a purpose in my head. And that was fascinating for me, that exercise, like building, like turning something into something else, or creating something new out of rubbish, like that sense of building something to make it useful for someone. So that was when I start getting really interested on design and building things. And then when I was a little older, my sister was dating an architect. And when I learned, I was 12 or something, and he told me what he did. And I couldn't believe it. I thought it was the coolest job ever. Hey! And,
yep.
And the fact that this guy was building houses for people to enjoy their lives or to have better quality of life was fascinating. So then I decided I wanted to be an architect. And that was a decision when I was like 12. I was like, I'm going to be an architect like this guy because this is the best job ever. And then when I was around 14, I think, or 15, I became really passionate about music. And music became my life. And especially punk rock and hardcore and metal. So, and at that time, I'm talking about like late 90s, basically you get independent music or alternative music by making copies of like bootleg of the records. So I was always trying to make my best to make my copies look better, not like the original, but to make it look decent. And I really enjoy doing calligraphy and drawings on my records. I was trying to make them look a little better because they were fake regardless. And doing that, my process of falling in love with music, one day I realized that one person was in charge of making the artwork for the records, and that was a job. And I had like another moment, like the meeting the architect guy. I was like, wow, so there is a job designing covers for albums. That's actually the best job ever, and I want to do that. So then I decided I wanted to become a designer because I wanted to make artwork for records. So, and then actually I started doing design before I went to uni. I was really lucky to get a computer quite early, around 96 or 97, which is quite privileged for a middle-class family in South America. So I'm really grateful for that. And as soon as I could, I got all the design software, like freehand at that time, Photoshop, Illustrator, and I started doing design work for anyone really, like for bands, for friends. I was in a really thriving community, like skaters, BMXers, people playing music. So yeah, I was really busy. Soon after, I decided to become a designer, even though I wasn't educated, but I did a lot of like not really professional work before going to uni. And then when I went to uni, it became real, like a proper design career.
So you studied design in uni or a different subject?
No, I went to the design school, and at that time, it was early 2000s. So the design industry was a little confused, I think, because we were transitioning to digital, but there also we were just talking about strategic design and services design and all these different streams of design work. So I went to design school to study design without any specialization, and then at the last year in school, I did a major on digital marketing, which is it was the only thing close to digital design at that time. But yeah, because when I started uni, that was the time I got into HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and that was mind blowing. The fact that I could create and publish websites on the spot, yeah, was a revelation for me. So I got really into web design. So during uni, I decided to do whatever felt closer to digital or online things, and it was marketing. It was the only thing available. We didn't have UX or UI or product design, anything like that at that time. You were lucky if you were taught Flash, or something like that at that time. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, remember those days, like
Mm,
those tools, which is it's much cooler than now. Like it's more like with a lot of possibilities that you can create, and
yeah.
also sometimes they are quite clunky and yeah, but yeah, those good old days for especially for graphic design and web designers. So
Mm,
that's the best time. Um, it sounds like your early stage design journey. It's kind of like a design process, like exploration, and try
mm,
different places, and also inspired by your father, and also but then discovered there's another part, like a domain for design some visual
mm.
elements to deliver the product to the target customer, and then you jump into it as a designer. So yeah, that's really great. If you have the time to do that again, is there something you want to do differently, or like would like to have like a different path on this early stage journey?
Um, Not really. Not really. Yeah, I think everything happens for a reason. And
Yeah,
I don't know, I think I was really lucky that my parents never really got too involved in my
mm,
career decisions. So I basically did what I wanted. And yeah, it turned out actually great. So yeah, I wouldn't change anything. Yeah.
mm,
And I think most of the time when you are allowed to do what you think within reason, it's really likely that the outcome will be good, at least for you, because
yeah,
basically you are doing it for yourself. So I never had too much influence of becoming a lawyer or a doctor, because I don't think I will have been happy by choosing that. So yeah, I'm actually quite fortunate that there is
mm,
nothing I will change in my career path. Yeah.
yeah. Because it sounds like an ideal path for a
Mm,
designer to start finding out, oh, this is the right direction. And it
yeah.
sounds like the decision your parent make to not make a decision for you, that sounds like a really big decision for them, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's a really great decision, and also as a could be a reminder for any parents like myself, for the next generation. Like,
Mm,
what's the right way for them? Probably not the right way for or from what we're thinking. And yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah.
cool. And how about how things going on when you move to New Zealand? Like, so your career back to Chile, and then like what's the middle step story, like from Chile to New Zealand?
Oh, that's a that's a really crazy journey. But yeah, so when I came out from uni, um, I started working in in an airline, which is the biggest airline in South America. It's called LATAM. It used to be called LAN at that time,
Yep.
and I was working. I mean, I knew I wanted to design software at that point, and which is quite crazy because I got into design because I wanted to design records. So the format changed, but I was really sure that I wanted to build software, and I got this job in the cargo operations team in the airline, designing the cargo, I mean the logistics software with a bunch of engineers, and it was great, but it was a little I mean, for a new designer working with only engineers, it was hard. I think I learned a lot from that experience in terms of stakeholder management, scoping, and understanding how software actually works. You know, like building software is almost like building any other construction project. You know, it's hard, it's slow, you know, so it was really good for me to understand how that type of software works compared to the type of software we usually interact with when we start our careers, which is more lightweight stuff like CMSs or websites or small apps. I was designing enterprise cargo software for airlines. It wasn't fun. It
Mm.
was really complicated. And then during that period, I start getting quite a bit of freelance work. And at that time, I was working with one of my best friends who's a designer also. And we were kind of like starting this small design company on the side. And after a couple of years in the airline, I decided to do that full time. And I became a business owner. And I realized it wasn't for me. Or maybe it wasn't for me at that age because I was, I don't know, 25 or 26, and I was completely burnout. And I wasn't doing any design work. I was dealing with customers, chasing payments, you know, like all the things that you do as a business owner. So I decided to close the company. I mean, we all decided to close it. And I decided that I wanted to take a break and do something else in the meantime. I was really good from a financial point of view, but I was done with software and technology in that world. And it's crazy how the destiny works, because a couple of weeks later, I mean, after making that decision, I was having breakfast with my friend, the same friend I used to work with, and I was looking at the newspaper, and I found this full page ad from Qatar Airways, and they were looking for flight attendants to work in Qatar Airways with no experience requirements, and all the other requirements where I kind of like fulfilled them. So I look at my friend and I was like, okay, I really don't want to touch anything related to design and technology, and this looks cool. What do you think? And he was like, you should go, man, and see what happens. They had an open day. Qatar Airways was hosting an open day the following weekend in Santiago. So I went. Long story short, I got the job and I moved to Qatar and I worked as a flight attendant for 3 years, like taking a break from design. And it was great. It was the best experience of my life. Like traveling around the world, looking after people in an airplane, yeah, connecting with all sort of like crazy characters around the world. It was amazing. And then I got a little bored of flying, and it's not for everyone really. And I start talking to friends of mine, in the startup and design scene in Chile, telling them that I was planning to go back. So yeah, I moved back to Santiago to work for this really cool startup called Art Daily in Chile. It was the biggest architecture website in the world, and it was a Chilean company. I met the founders, we connected right away, and I joined as the only designer in the company. I was employee number 8 at that time. And yeah, long story short, that company grew like crazy. We went from being in 2 markets to being in 8 markets when I left. I
Wow.
joined as employee 8, and we were like 70 when I left the company. And during that period, I came to New Zealand for holidays. A friend of mine was working here, and I just fell in love with the country. Like I had such a great experience in terms of the sense of community, the closeness to nature, and it really clicked something in my mind.
Yep.
And I was already thinking about leaving my city because I don't like big places. Like I'm not really like a city person. And Santiago, I think it's around 8 million people. And I was planning to move to a small town in Chile. I wasn't planning to leave the country. But then when I saw New Zealand, I was like, wow, this is really nice. I'll give it a try. And I made a couple of contacts when I was here, people who worked in the software industry. So I went back home, and after 6 months, I started applying for jobs in New Zealand. I applied for 3 jobs and I got 2 offers. So it
Mm.
was actually really easy. I'm grateful for that again. Yeah, because I wasn't expecting the process to be so easy. So yeah, I got an offer and I moved here in 2015. Yeah, yeah, and I was working for a small startup that got sold right after, like a year ago after I joined, and then I joined Orion Health, which is a big software healthcare provider from New Zealand, working globally. Yeah, that's how I got here.
Well, thanks for sharing, and I think because I already knew a little bit about the journey, but yeah, again, like when I heard it again, it's always as exciting as the first time because jumping off from a designer's seat to a flight and for free, and sounds like a movie plot, but yeah. Um, and it's also like a perfect way to do a gap year or like a gap year between the 2 jobs as a designer. But it's also relevant to design because it's about
Yeah,
knowing building connection with people and exploring the world, and also like have a way to connect with different dots. So that's awesome. And I noticed that you mentioned um, you talk to your friend before you make this decision, and he encouraged you to do that. That's quite interesting. And also later, when you start to get job, I noticed that you uh, like probably communicate with those people before those decisions, or do you make the decision like already confirmed in your heart just to validate with other people, or you just look for other people's suggestion on your direction? Like I want to know the weight before between people's suggestion and your personal thoughts. Yeah, hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's all about knowing yourself and knowing what you want and what you like in life. I think that's really important. And I think if we go back to my story, back in my story, I think part of why my mom and my dad never tried to influence what I wanted to do in school or uni was because I was so sure. Even since I was a kid, I seemed so decided on what I wanted to do. It was like, I want to build things first. I want to be an architect. I want to be a designer. I was always sure. So, and I think it's really scary to try to change the perspective of someone who's really sure about what they want.
Yep.
And I think I call it like a small supervision, because I didn't have much supervision when I was a kid from my parents, which is, I think it's a great thing. Kind of like helped me to become really sure of what I wanted, and also quite aware of what was good for me or what wasn't good for me. So, but when it comes to really big decisions, usually I share my concerns with people that know me very well, but it's all about the potential risks or unexpected consequences of the decision. And in this case, when I talked to my friend about going to Qatar, it was basically a big risk. Like, I never heard the name of that country in my life before.
Yeah.
I did some Googling, and it looked really different, man. It's all people like wearing traditional dresses in the middle of the desert with a crazy weather. So yeah, it's really scary. And then I'm going to do something that I never done before. I have no experience doing that. English wasn't great at that time. It's not great now, so imagine at that time. And so it was scary. And I talked to my friend. He was like, we have nothing to lose, because we were in such a good position. We just sold the company, we had money. Yeah, like we were living kind of it was like an extended holiday in a way. So the decision, it was a little scary, but then as I went into the process, I got more insights, and I start building my own view of the world. And I think after I did the Qatar thing, my levels of self-confidence went to the roof, because basically I went through any crazy challenge you can imagine during those 3 years. Like, I don't know, I saved people's life in the plane because I was the first day there. So
Wow.
that's crazy. It's a crazy feeling when you have one person who can die relying on you inside a can 40,000 feet over any closer source of help. So those experiences are crazy. Then also making friends from everywhere in the world. When I was in Qatar, my best friend, and he's one of my best friends still, he's from Syria. I met friends from India. Like, coming from South America, this was mind-blowing. Then I got lost so many times in Bangladesh, in Japan. So you keep building this self-confidence because you've been through a lot of different challenges. So I think this confidence or this ability to make decisions is basically based on what you have overcame in the past, and also knowing what's good for you, which is something that you you are the only person who actually knows what's good for you. So when you know that, it gives you a sense of confidence that may seem a little special, from for other people. But it's basically knowing what you want, and that you have done it before.
That's a great reflection. I love it, Mendo, because that's relevant to the next question I'm going to ask. But it seems that it partially answered because you mentioned that after this 3 years gap from Qatar, you wanted to find a designer's job and at this company, so it's just so easy and you got the offer. And also when you moved to New Zealand, you applied 3 jobs and got 2 offers. I was wondering how it could be so easy because it's as a non-native speaker, and also consider you have a 3 years gap before the last designer's job. How it could be so easy? But it seems that confidence is a big factor for get it easier than you thought. Is that something you're thinking, or some have you? What do you think on this?
Yeah, I think confidence, it's a big one, but then also because in this case, when you are making such a big move, like getting a new job, it's challenging. Getting a new job in a different country, it's more challenging. Getting a job in a new country that doesn't speak your language, more challenging. And then it's New Zealand. It's a country that everyone wants to move into, so it's a really sought after place. So I think in that matter, comparing yourself with others is not helpful, really. And that can trigger, or that can bring up things that may be not useful for you as you are going through the challenge. So for example, if I'm interviewing with a company, but I think most of the other candidates got more chances to get the job, it's really likely that I won't be my best self in the interview. So yeah, I think that process of self-confidence is something that you need to build continuously. And also, how do you balance the imposter syndrome, because that's such a I don't think imposter syndrome is necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes it can stop you from doing things that you really want, because you feel you are not good enough.
Yep.
So for me, in that matter, there are two things that I always think about. One is the value you can actually bring to the company, and that's something it's something you can. I mean, you're the only one who can assess that. Like, what's the value that me, not as a designer, but as a Armando, I can bring to the company? You have some skills taken for granted, for example, like facilitation, UI and UX design, research. Those are the things that every competent designer should bring to the table. But then you have other skills, like maybe you are really good at aligning people. You are really good at explaining things. You are really good at bringing people together around the customer experience. Those are the things that you are the only one who can assess what's the value that they bring to the company. And by doing that exercise, you start building up yourself to have the confidence to perform well in an interview. And then you have the other more obvious recommendations, like doing your research about the company, understanding the role really well, understanding what they do, try to understand the people that you are going to talk to, and yeah, and then also knowing that even if you don't get it, you will learn something and you will get to meet some cool people, like even when I was on the process for Atlassian, for me, every interview was like, oh, I met a really good time leader and I learned a couple of things. So every interview was a victory. And then when I got the role offer, it was like a super victory, because it was kind of like the sum of all these small successes.
That's an awesome mindset, like for treating every interview as a reward rather than a test, because
Mm,
you will get know new people anyway, and by the conversation with them for that interview, at least you know the description of the company or like other things to you always learn something new. So that's a great mindset to turn like as a challenge, but as a as an exploration. I really like that. And
yeah,
yeah, um, I think yeah, that's a great reminder for everyone who's listening, and also for myself. Like, think about the value that you can bring to the company. I'm trying to visualize this like a kind of like you build the company require a person to build a house for them or build a shelter, and as a designer, will probably have skills such as design, research, other things. It's more like the bricks and things you already got, but we need to find a way to put them together,
yeah,
and those could be some soft skills or could be some potentials you have, or but you need to find a way and to show that you can build it together and deliver the house for the company for now or in the future. If you can show that and you have the self belief that you can build this for the company, and this
exactly.
yeah this will show the confidence will be showed during the interview process, and people can feel it, and then
Yeah.
so that's a really
And,
great point. Love it.
and that feeling that you get from the small successes, like every interview, as I said before, it's something that no one can take away from you. So even if you don't get the job, you got all the learnings. But if you ignore that value, then you only get lost. You get the loss of not getting the job. But if you see life, I mean, not only work, but life as an opportunity of gaining small pieces of wisdom or maturity or ways to better yourself, then you never fail, really, because you're learning a little more. Not only as a designer, but as a friend, as a brother, as a partner. So for me, that's almost like a way of life.
Yep. It's just taking notes for the later stage. But yeah, that's great. And you mentioned imposter syndrome, and also from what we've heard, a lot of things relevant to confidence. I want to know like what do you think about imposter syndrome? Do you ever have the experience that or the scenarios you're not feeling confident or imposter syndrome comes, and then how you deal with it, like or
Mm,
like what's your story on that?
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, for me, it's really important to understand things really well first. So I remember when I heard the concept of imposter syndrome for the first time, I went into a rabbit hole of understanding what it meant really well. So I listened to some podcasts about psychology and all of that. And something that really resonated with me is that most of the time imposter syndrome happen to people who want to genuinely be better. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it happens to people who are constantly pushing themselves.
Hmm.
But then it's kind of like double-sided sword, because the same thing that's trying to help you to be better or to push yourself, it's making you feel insecure or doubting your skills. So it's something that helps you, but it brings you down at the same time. So yeah, of course, I had imposter syndrome at some point, but I think once you understand the value of what you do really well, and you have evidence of that value, um, and also you combine that with the experience you have, like doing your craft, um, usually you start being a little kinder with yourself, because I think having imposter syndrome is just being too hard on yourself, not being compassionate and empathetic with the journey you have walked so far. So I think it's important, in order to reduce imposter syndrome, to reflect on our experience as a designer, and also reflect on the wins and the value we have provided over our career. And then, if there are things you want to get better at, make a plan. Or if you are lucky enough to work in a company like Xero or Atlassian with really strong PDP programs, you can work on that with your manager, you know? So, yeah, I think imposter syndrome should be fuel for be better, but not to doubt yourself, if that makes sense.
Yep, that's a really great reflection. Because while you think, while you're saying, I'm trying to think two things from some experience that I had while I'm having some imposter syndrome, and try to find it's always too like it always with this experience that I want to be better, as you mentioned. That's a great point. But also, like, I've already I feel stressed, but because I was put in some position or some place that I worked hard before, and then I was put on that place, which could be like as a privilege, like I've earned this
Mm,
opportunity to be as a better person who I'm not uh, uh, that like right now is not who I am, but still, like, I want to be better. And the other way is that I see there are some things to be improved, and then can see it as an opportunity that there are some gaps or some things missing, and how I can fill those gaps. And that's probably relevant, probably helpful for the people who's listening. If you have something similar, it's you're not alone if you have this. Everyone, I think most of people have that sooner or later, or one or two times, or many times in their career, and nothing to be ashamed of, and just yeah, find out what could be improved, and do something later. And yeah.
yeah. No, and you mentioned something really important, which is this sense of I should be there, that feeling of entitlement, like, I don't know, for example, I'm a product designer, but I should be a senior product designer. Well, if you are not, maybe you shouldn't. You need to actually assess the perception of yourself and make sure that you are operating at that level. Because, like, at least when it comes to seniority levels in the workforce, the levels are clearly defined, so
Yep.
if you think that you should be in a place that you are not, maybe you need to look inside instead of keep trying to push yourself to a place where maybe you are just not supposed to be. So I think the when you feel entitled to be in a place that you're not, first you need to validate why that's not happening, and see what are the opportunities to get there. But also um, be grateful of where you are now, and what are the possibilities and the opportunities you have to grow in that particular moment. Because I think as soon as we feel entitled of something, we start neglecting what we got, and we become unhappy. And
Yeah.
that's the worst, because then you are not, you become bitter,
Mm.
and that can happen to anything. So for example, like when I go mountain biking and I see like really nice mountain bikes, I'm like, ooh, I would love to have the newest model, or I would like to have this new transmission or whatever. And then I stop enjoying my bike and I have a nice bike, so I shouldn't do that. But the mind is tricky in that matter. So for me, it's in terms of what we discuss, it's about like trying not to feel entitled to something, and then at the same time be grateful,
Mm.
because you will get there. Like everyone will get there if they have the right, the heart in the right place, I think.
Yep. Um, well, that's very good. I love it. Feel not entitled. Yeah, that's a great reminder, not only at Korea but at many other places
Mm.
as well. You mentioned the language. You mentioned that your English was not good. I think it's really good now, and because I've learned that your communication style is I've learned a lot. But when you start work in an environment or in a new country, speak a different language, and especially consider you want to deliver the value for the company you work for, like was that a barrier for you? Like the language was a barrier for you at early stage, and how do you, if so, how do you overcome with it? Like,
Mm.
yeah, because as I'm asking this question as a non native speaker point of view.
Oh man, like, yeah, I think, it's always challenging when you move to, because in my life, I moved from Chile to other place and then come back to Chile, then to another place. It's not like I left Chile and I never came back.
Mm.
So the first days in an environment with a foreign language are always really hard, because you're not used to the accent, you are not used to speaking a new language all the time. But the worst experience for me was when I moved to New Zealand, because I was being in America, you get used to the American accent, the American English accent. And when I came here for the first time on holiday, I was like, okay, this is a really different accent. But most of the time I was speaking in normal day-to-day situations, so it wasn't a problem. But then when I moved here to work, and I went to a couple of not interviews, like meetings with the team, like actual operational meetings, I couldn't understand anything because they were all Kiwis with their accent that
Yeah.
was super new to me. And I was shocked because I never had that experience of kind of understanding the language, but not understanding the accent and the words they were using. And what I was, I was feeling really insecure. And it's hard because it wasn't a matter of learning better English. It was about like learning how Kiwis speak,
Yep.
So what I did in that time as a kind of like emergency solution, I start writing minutes for every meeting as a way to validate what we discussed in the meeting. But the real intention of those minutes was to double check that I understood everything properly. So it was my own way of making sure that whatever my understanding of what was happening in the meeting was right. And
do you share those meeting notes with other
with
people
everyone, yeah,
with everyone?
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
it's a way of validation, like is it right or not? Okay.
yeah. So it was a little sneaky, but it worked. And And then my first next step was to make some Kiwi friends or to speak with Kiwi people. So I started going to meetups, yeah, I don't know, walks, like any opportunity to get familiar with the accent. But yeah, I think in general, it's all about communication, because when I'm speaking English in a professional context, I'm not trying to speak English well. I'm trying to communicate well. So you need to be really aware of how you communicate regardless of the language. And also, what are the things that may be stopping you from communicating better, and the things that may be stopping others from understand what you're trying to say. So I think speaking English is really important, like speaking English really well. It's important in terms of pronunciation, accent, the vocabulary you use. But also, I think it's important to be mindful of what is your communication style and how you can um, make the best use of that communication style in English. So yeah, and I think that's why, for example, I personally think that I'm quite different in Spanish than in English, because and there is a cultural side of things also. But here, at least in Australia and New Zealand, I rather being the one consuming information and making some validating my understanding. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that I don't speak as much as I do in English than Spanish, because I feel that my value is on driving the conversation rather than speaking too much. So I try not to speak too much, but to speak specifically what I need. I mean, what I have to in order to enable what I want to do, or what I want to communicate.
Yeah, because that's actually what I want to ask earlier. Like I noticed when you speak, it's quite different, or even when you write, speak and write sometimes is the same as a communication style. I noticed that it's not as many other people, especially those native speakers. Sometimes they speak to think, or they are thinking at the same time when they speak. But from what I've observed, you think first and speak, and sometimes just deliver the just enough information and done, without rumbling a lot. This is something I want to improve as well. Like sometimes I feel, especially when I get asked some questions I'm not familiar with, I start to rambling and start to talk back and forth about the same thing. But I noticed that when you speak and write, seems you put some intention first and
Yeah.
focus on the communication rather than the perfection of the language. So I think that's a really big takeaway
Yeah.
from me.
And it may sound a little weird, but meditation is something that really helped me to communicate better. Because when you meditate effectively, at least from my opinion, you start seeing yourself from an observer point of view. So it's basically you start kind of like disassociating your reality from who you are. So you start taking this observer position in your life. And now when I communicate, before saying or writing anything, I think about the intention of my communication and who's the audience and what they need to know, and then I write. And that made such a big difference in my communications. And it's really funny because this is something that changed when I start meditating. It's not something I'm practicing. And people tells me sometimes like, you communicate really well. And I'm like, do I? Because I haven't done any effort, but people are noticing that my communications are different, are really intentional, so I don't share much of what I think. I just give the information I think I have, and I try to get the information I need, so it's quite transactional in that matter. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I also feel similar feeling. Like your communication, and like when you write something, it might not long, but quite accurate and straightforward and just to the point, and people can get, oh, that's the point, and so easy to digest. So yeah. And if speaking of meditation, but yeah, we already talked. So not sure if you have more time, but maybe I'll just add one, two or three questions related to the meditation and spiritual practice, because this is also what I think it's quite different from other designers, that you put these two types of the exercise or the practices together, like meditation or like a spiritual practice and design, like a mindful design. Oh, by the way, that's the title of your new website, right? The mindful design. Why do you have this? Why do you name it like this? Yeah.
Oh, that's another big question, but yeah, I mean, why did I mean, I keep on changing the name of my site all the time, but for me, that's that phrase represents where I am, because I see, I mean, yeah, how do I phrase this? I really love being a designer, and I see people like changing careers or being unhappy with what they're doing, and I feel so privileged that I get paid for doing something I really enjoy doing, which is running design teams in software companies. I've been doing that for a long time, and I can't get bored of that. It's like, it's really fun for me to do it. I really enjoy it. And I think it's awesome because I think design, it's intention. For me, that's the closest definition to design, is being intentional about anything. And that's the path I'm taking in my life also, like being intentional about what I want to get out of this time on earth. And so it's like I'm experiencing a second coming of design in my life. I don't only love being a designer at work, but I love being intentional about my life. So that's the mindful part in that matter, that I feel that the fact that I'm so grateful and happy for being a designer, and also it makes my life easier than other people, because again, I get paid well, good benefits, good work, great people, so it's a good life in a way. So I think the mindful design, it's a combination of how design has given me so much over my career, and the position that design gave me in life, it's also helping me to be more mindful about life. So it's basically the combination of those two things.
Yeah, sounds like two wins for one play that can help you, and yeah, because I think it's more like even more important at this stage, like with so many disruptions and so many noise around us, and sometimes and also we have the never lack of information or even the material stuff that will never lack of it. So make the be selective intentionally. That could be like a quality or like a way of living for most of us. We need to start to have that mindset. So yeah, that's not only for designers, and yeah, I think that's really a good point. But how could get started? Like if people want to think, oh, I want to be mindful. It's not like a wish, right? What could be some actionable steps or suggestions that you will suggest that people can start to do?
Yeah. I mean, mindfulness, it's a practice. It's something you can practice as anything else, like coding or mountain biking. It's something you have to practice to get better at. And mindfulness is it's not a new concept. It's basically the one of the core aspects of Buddhist meditation, which is, it's not exactly the same, but it's coming from Vipassana meditation, which is basically learning to see the world as it is, without any judgment or without any attachment. So I think in terms of getting better at mindfulness, yeah, you need to get started. Like you can do so many things. I have done pretty much everything, but you can have a gratitude buddy, which is basically someone. It can be your partner, your friend, someone at work would be really interesting. But basically, every day, share something with that person. Share something that made you feel grateful or gratitude in that day, and get used to be grateful for things. Then the other suggestion would be to start meditating. You can start with an app with recordings on your own, or you can go to your nearest Buddhist temple. But meditation, it's a big one. That one changed my life forever. And then also getting into the like reading the literature. There is a lot of books about mindfulness, meditation, spirituality. But I think what's really important, the first step, is to be aware of why you want to become more mindful, and what are the how that success looks like. What's the actual problem in the real world that you are trying to fix, and then just put a practice around it. But you need to practice. That's the most important part. So yeah, I think any of that, or even yeah, like yeah, I think I think meditation would be a good start. Yeah, or trying to learn mindfulness by the concept of mindfulness, because that true intention and that true presence, when you're able to unlock that true presence, your experience of life changes, I feel, because you stop thinking about the future and you stop thinking about the past, and you just live the present with some degree of bliss and joy according to your circumstances. But then also you start becoming a little more optimistic about the future. So yeah, I think it's really important, especially now where we are so distracted and so disconnected by the amount of content and information we have. So yeah, I think now it's a moment where being mindful, it's actually critical for mental health.
Yeah.
And because we are being bombarded every day, 24 hours, with so much noise, and most of that noise is not really helpful.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's something I think. Yeah, a perfect timing for everyone to do that, and never
Mhm.
too late, never early. So yeah, but for the mindfulness and maybe spiritual practice, because there are so many things to discuss, maybe we can find another time,
Yeah,
if you
yeah, for
have in
sure.
the future, and just deep dive on that part. And
Yeah.
personally, I'm quite interested. One last question. That's a traditional question that for every guest on my podcast. Are there any recommendations that you will influence you in career or life, or like books, people, uh, like movies or anything that you want to suggest or recommend to people who's listening, any type? Mm.
Um, oh, that's a good one, considering there is so much content now. Um, yeah, I think it's really important to have a view of who do you think it's taking the craft to the next level. So, for example, if we talk about um, design, or if we talk about product design, it's important to have your own view about who are the companies or the organizations that are taking the practice further. So for me personally, I'm always looking at what Airbnb is doing, what Pinterest is doing, what Uber is doing, because I think those companies are pushing the craft, to the next level. And I'm really fortunate to work with people who worked at Uber before, or companies like this. So I'm learning from them, which is incredible. And and also, I think it's really important to have a view about who are the characters or the people who you think are doing things that align with your view of the craft. So, for example, now I've been following more leaders and people that I think are pushing the craft further. And then in terms of books, I yeah, I think there are some classics, of course, like this Design for Everyday Things by um, Don
Don't
Norman.
know. Yep.
Yeah. Then, yeah, Don't Make Me Think by Stephen Kruger is his name,
Yep.
I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Stephen Curry.
Then for me, Lean UX and Sense and Respond are great books about that. I mean, I don't think they're about design in a specific. They're
Mm.
more about how you can build businesses by understanding people well and
Mm.
solving their problems.
Yep.
So those two books I think are really important. And then, yeah, some organizations, like I still follow Nielsen and Norman, even though I think, yeah, I don't know, they've been a little controversial lately. I mean, there is some controversy about the work they're doing, but I still follow them. And then also people like Jared Spool. He has a great community under UAE, which is the education institution he's running.
Yep.
So yeah, I think for me it's more about following people and companies who are pushing the craft. But I think mostly, like for the last couple of years, it's been more about being really intentional about the things you don't want to hear, like trying to keep the noise away. Because I think lately there is more noise than signal around the craft and the advices and the information we are sharing in the design community. It's really hard to find good stuff because there are so much bad stuff or things that are not useful.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective to think about what you don't want to consume or don't want to be influenced. And take like live away from it. So that's a really good point, because there are never lack of great stuff, but never lack of good stuff. But great stuff is still like a quite limited resource, and also our attention and our effort is limited resource as well. So and consider the time you are consuming those things, might be good to think about what you don't want to check. I do have some resonate on this, because earlier stage when I start to learn UX, I start to learn design, I do find some articles from Medium is helpful, but then I decided to not check any articles, but I prefer to read books rather than articles, because at that time it seems some articles just focus on one perspective rather than a holistic point of view. And also because the author want to get the article read by as many people as possible, they probably start to use some clickbait or accelerate the fact, or just to make it really emotional or things like that, to get it get more page views, which can be a bias for me as a learning designer. So that's quite resonate. So thanks for sharing that.
I think it's quite tricky now, the amount of information about design that we can find, that I think can be a little hurtful for new designers. For example, like there is this trend of not working on companies that don't understand design, or if your company doesn't understand UX, go somewhere else. And actually, where I personally learned more about design was trying to sell design in a team that didn't get it, or trying to introduce user-centered approaches in a team that was not aware of them. But this type of advice, I think it can be hurtful for new designers on one side, because they're stopping themselves from doing something that may give them a lot of return in terms of experience, and then they may get frustrated by not getting the job that the internet is telling them to get. So because most of the companies who get design are the companies that everyone wants to work for. So if you consider only those type of companies as the landscape of companies you can work for, maybe you're stopping yourself from having a great opportunity by joining a company that maybe doesn't get design yet, but you can be that person who will drive design and change in that particular company.
Yeah.
But if you think that's not a good opportunity for you because the internet is telling you, then you may be stopping yourself from being exposed to a great experience.
Yeah. And also it's narrow your scope as a junior designer, because realistically, not all maybe just a really small amount of companies can do it well. Like maybe 20% of the companies on the market are doing it a really good way on design, ideal way on design. The other companies are still trying to build it, or like not in the ideal state. And if you only focus on those maybe 20% of the companies to work with, and you're just ignore the larger markets and make it harder to find a new job at first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really good point. Love it. Yes, we scheduled this meeting for 1 hour, but really enjoying the conversation. But I don't want to take too much time from Armando. And thanks, guys, for listening. I think maybe we can find another time to have a chat with Armando on the on other topics, design, meditation, mindfulness, and other things. But yeah, thanks, Armando, for joining us
No worries. Thank you,
this
man.
on this
Yeah,
chat.
it's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys, for listening. And I'll put all the information like books, other stuff that we mentioned on the show notes of this podcast. Thanks again, and see you next episode.
Okay, awesome. See you. Thank you, everyone.